Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Diane Hayden, publisher of Natural Nutmeg magazine, and welcome to our weekly podcasts where I interview our guest writers and contributors on topics ranging from natural medicine, nutrition, fitness, green living, spirituality, and how to live a healthier, more holistic lifestyle. I am excited to have with me today Eilis Philpott. She's the owner of Soul Healing Journey and the Academy for Soul Healing. And she has been a healing practitioner and teacher for over 20 years. She has quite a fascinating story, and we're going to learn more about her today. So welcome, Eilish. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? And I'm just going to correct your pronunciation of my name. It's Eilish.
Eilish.
Yeah, that's okay. It's like a lot of my workshops I start with, this is how you pronounce my name.
Right. I had it, and it's funny because it starts with an E, which doesn't
Yeah,
necessarily mean that it should be pronounced I-lish, but
it's the Irish language. That's
yeah.
all I can say.
Perfect. So let's talk a little bit about your background because the first article you wrote for us for Natural Nutmeg was fantastic in the sense of, I think, helping people really understand, you know, trauma and things that might happen to them and how they can go about, you know, learning about it and growing from that, because you were obviously in a different country growing up, and you know, I remember one part of your article where you said that they didn't even really have a diagnosis for you, or the
Right.
diagnosis was incorrect, and so you didn't even know that there was really such a thing or treatment for it.
Yeah.
So yeah, take us back a little bit about, you know,
Yeah.
your life. And
Um, so the condition, so to speak, that we're talking about is depression and anxiety. Um, and when I look back now, I can see that I had over my childhood periods of depression, but they weren't as severe. It was just, oh, she's sad or whatever. So it was around, I'd just finished my degree. I'd had a lot of traumatic things happen in my life, and became severely depressed, like clinically depressed with all the symptoms. But like I said in the article, in Ireland, it was Ireland I grew up, I didn't even know that this was something you could go to the doctor for. Um, I just thought I was going crazy. I thought there was something majorly wrong with me. I didn't know. So because of that, I just got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, and then eventually ended up in a psychiatric hospital in Dublin. And in Dublin, that was in I think it was the late 80s. So how they diagnosed it was that it was reactionary depression. So in other words, all the shitty things that had happened in my life the previous year, major traumatic events, had caused me to become depressed. So the solution was to put me on medication. So I was put on a lot of medication. I was in the hospital for 3 months, I think, and was discharged with lots of medication, but no plan of how to get me off the medication. I had a few kind of doctors' outpatient visits, and they'd say, "Oh, well, wean yourself off them," which didn't help.
right.
So over the next few years, I basically stayed at home, worked on our home business. I did date, got engaged to a guy that I'd gone to college with who was living in London. So the plan was for me to move to London to live with him, which I did, but it didn't go very well. And I ended up back in hospital again. And one of the things that occurred was that when I went to the pharmacy to refill my prescriptions, I was told most of them were blacklisted and should not be used in combination with any of the other ones. So I was like, oh my God, what do I do? So ended up in this hospital, and the first thing they did was take me off all the medication and give me alternate stuff that was better than this concoction that I'd been on. And I started therapy. So therapy was the start of my spiritual journey. Um, I did therapy, I would say, for 2 years, maybe. I was in that hospital. It was a day hospital. So I was in the hospital during the day and I'd go home at night and kind of sleep. So like a job, but you're going to hospital. And then as I weaned out of hospital, I was still seeing the therapist. So she was very supportive of me. One of the things that she made me realize was that I had a choice about how my life would go. And I'm not sure if I wrote that in this article, but one day, it was early on, I was always, oh, I can go back to Ireland. I don't know if I want to stay. This is too hard, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. And one day she said, you have got until 1 o'clock today to decide if you are staying or if you're going home.
You did write that. I remember that.
Did I write that one? So, because it's major, it was a major shift for me now that I look back. And I was spent 2 or 3 hours. It's like, what am I going to do? What am I going to? It was pre-cell phone, so I couldn't call my husband. I had to just sit with this struggle. And I knew that if I went back to Ireland, I was never leaving again. I was going to be living in my parents' home and become a bag lady or something, or a cat, someone with cats. And not live the life I wanted to live. And if I stayed, I didn't know if it was going to work, so to speak. I didn't know whether I would be okay. And I knew it would be really, really, really hard work, and it was. But I chose to stay. So I stayed, did the work, recovered really, really well, got back functioning into everyday life and started off with part-time jobs, then went back to college, finished my education, my post degree in education, which I had to give up in Ireland, and started teaching. So when I was teaching high school science, and I was able to function, not always very easily. It was hard. And I got pregnant, had my son, and the day I returned from, this is one of those synchronicities that's just so cool. I returned from maternity leave and resigned that day. And my husband, while he was at work, was offered a position in New York. So literally, as I was resigning, he was being offered a position for us to move to America.
Wow.
So we said yes, and did all the stuff we needed to do. And I knew that I was coming to America to get well. I didn't know how. I didn't know what I was going to do. All I knew was I wanted to do something alternative, and I was going to get well. And I had just started, when we lived in England, with being exposed to acupuncture, shiatsu, so some of those kind of more physically oriented, but which impact all the energy bodies, and homeopathy. So waited until I got here, and with our 9-month-old baby, and made the adjustment and started doing alternative stuff. And
wow.
Eventually made it here.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I love that you pointed out that you had a choice and that was novel to you, because I think that's really what it comes down to for a lot of people, is they convince themselves they don't have a choice.
Yeah. And I had grown up in a home that was, my dad was very narcissistic. So having a choice was not even an option. It's like you had the opinion of him, to the degree that I didn't even know at that stage in the beginning of therapy what clothes I liked. Did I like this because I liked it, or did I like it because I was rebelling to my dad? Yep. So it's like I had to uncover who I was as an individual person. And so that major decision, it's like, it would be hard for anybody, but for someone who has never had to make a major life decision before, it was devastating. But I knew, it's like I've always had this inner knowing that carries me through all this stuff. So even when I was in therapy, it's like that piece that can detach and know yes, I'm going through all these painful emotions and it's really, really hard, but isn't it really fascinating at the same time? You know, it's like I found all of it so fascinating.
Yeah, if you can step out for a
Yeah,
second, right? That,
yeah,
and that's what few of us do, right? We're always in here,
yeah,
thinking, thinking, thinking.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, if you can step outside for a second and look at it from that perspective, it is amazing.
Oh, totally. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I enjoyed the theory of it,
Hmm.
not so much the emotions of it.
Which I'm sure led you to what you're doing now.
Totally. So
Yeah.
when I came to America, I was searching. It's like, what's my thing? And I obviously tried lots of different things. Um, and taking a step back, I'm the eldest of 9 children. So my mom was always pregnant. Like I was in college when she had my last sibling, when I was 19 or 18 or something. So she was always pregnant. There were always babies and toddlers. So that's what the environment I grew up in. And then when I was teaching high school, I was in a Catholic school in London where there were a lot of older women who did not want to teach sex and reproduction. So the young new teacher got that. So that was me. And I loved teaching sex and reproduction. It was one of the few classes where they actually sat down and listened to what you were
Right.
saying, you know? So again, I was in the energy of how women get pregnant and all the biology around the pregnancy. And then I got pregnant. So I was teaching this stuff while I was pregnant. So once I got to the States and found rebirthing and started having rebirthing sessions as a client, and didn't make the connection until years later that my whole life had led me to this place. Rebirthing is a breathing technique. It's a technique that in those days in particular was very focused on birth trauma. And people think of birth trauma as something bad that happened during your birth, but just the very fact that you're going from inside your mom to the outside world is a traumatic event because there's so many changes happening to that little baby. And then if there's any complications, it's even more traumatic. So I was a client for 2 or 3 years. I wanted to do training, but it was around the time where the rebirthing world was kind of undergoing a shift. So there wasn't much training. And then two of the main rebirther trainers who traveled the world to train happened to live in Connecticut. All these synchronicities.
Of course.
And they had retired. They had retired. And I actually had spoken with, it was Bob and Mally Mandel. I'd spoken with Mally through some MLM program that I was doing. I can't even remember which one it was back then. It could have been essential oils or some supplement or something. So I'd kind of spoken to her. It's like, she called me and I was, oh my God, Mally Mandel called me. So I knew who she was from the rebirthing world. But then they came out of retirement and they did a 9-month training program for rebirthing. So both my husband and I did that. I did it because I wanted to be a practitioner. He did it because he just wanted to expand his own growth. The following year, I did advanced rebirthing and was assisting at the rebirthing training. And they're the only 2 trainings that they did. And then after that, she kind of went off and did her own thing. And he does still do rebirthing stuff, but not the training of practitioners per se. So it was definitely a spiritually led path.
Mm.
And the other piece that I discovered was the Course in Miracles was very popular in those days. So my rebirther had a Course in Miracles group running. And I'd come from Catholic Ireland, where there is no other religion, and discovered this whole world of spirituality. It's like, I didn't even know this existed.
Yep.
It's like in Ireland, I so wanted to get the connection, but it just wasn't happening. And then I came here and this door opened and it was like, oh my God, there's this whole world that I didn't even know existed. And here it is. And it's exactly what I was looking for.
In Connecticut, of all places.
In Connecticut. Yeah, and the energy in Connecticut in those days was pretty dark. It's like I was kind of one of these little lights in this dark
Yeah.
state of Connecticut. So, but there were pockets here and there, and the
Oh,
pockets are
tons.
just, yeah, they've
Yeah.
just spread out over the years. So that was kind of how I got started.
That's awesome. So, now you have your own programs. So how
Yes.
did you get from basically being, like a practitioner of other people's programs where you
Yeah.
can, reteach them or use them for healing or
Yeah.
whatnot, but now you have put together basically your own foundation.
Yeah, it's kind of mine and a mixture of other people's stuff. So it's
Mhm.
kind of a morphing of a lot of different things. So in around the year 2000, I met, it was always through my clients who I met really cool people, but I met a woman named Linda Dillon who channels Council of Love. And I started working with her. So I would go to her workshops. She had an annual one in Sedona every year. And working with the Council of Love, it was bringing love in various ways with different themes each year. But one of the things that happened was there's a process that Linda channeled called the 13th octave, which is joining with source. So it's going to the 13th. We live in a 12 planes, 12 realities, 12 dimensions. But this is the 13th. So it's going to the 13th octave, joining with source without having to die. So that process came, and I can't remember the date because I said before that I don't remember dates. So it was in the 90s. Sometimes that portal was opened. And then around-ish the same time, a guy named Satchmar channeled LaHoChi. So LaHoChi is kind of similar in idea to Reiki in that it's hands-on healing and you are bringing in God source energy, slightly different positions than Reiki and not the same attunement, but a new energy that was brought to the planet, which had been revived since the Atlantean times. So she was guided around 2000-ish to join the 13th octave and the LaHoChi, and a new modality came about, 13th octave LaHoChi, which is very long, but there is still the separate LaHoChi, so you have to say 13th octave LaHoChi. And what happened was that there were more activation positions added. A lot of the masters are involved, a lot of angels, archangels, star people, there's lots of gifts that we receive, which I'm not going to go into now because there's way too many. But how I describe it to students when they're doing that class is that the energy is so broad and it covers so many different types of energy. So it's like I did a healing one time and it was all ancestral lineage work that we were doing. And another time it was a lot of shamanic energy that was coming in. Another time it may be the angels. It may be working with animals. So there's kind of like this huge, huge, huge energy, which when somebody receives their initiation and training and downloads, they're receiving the pieces that they need to receive. So when I teach the 13th octave LaHoChi, my goal is not to have 10, 20, 30 cookie cutter versions of me out there in the world teaching whatever it is or doing LaHoChi. I mean, it's great that they're doing 13th octave LaHoChi, but that's not the goal. The goal is for them to use this energy to figure out who they are in the world and what their purpose is. So what they're doing. So I spent many years working with that energy, always still with the rebirthing in the background, because I felt, and still do, that rebirthing is a very foundational energy in that it helps, because it's working on all the energy body, it helps keep a person grounded in their body while connecting spiritually, mentally, and emotionally. So helping bypass that thought process. So that's always been the foundation of the work I do. And then I'm one of those people who just, I see something, I think, oh, that's really interesting. I'm going to train in that. So I've done so many trainings in so many different modalities. So at some stage, it's like, okay, let's start teaching. My past was I was a teacher, so I knew how to teach. I wasn't sure how I was going to teach or where I was going to teach. And then around 2016, it's like I really put it out there. No, I'm meant to teach. And I think I did a Facebook post, will anyone host an event? And somebody responded. So that was the very first event that I held. Was in 2017. And I have been holding events ever since then. But then the development was that somebody at one of the workshops said, you need to expand this weekend into a bigger program. And I also had a reading around the same time saying you're meant to share all the information you have with people. And my human goes, what?
How is that possible?
I don't have a lot of information.
Exactly.
But it's just like, no, they're talking about somebody else. So I sat with this. And then as I carried on teaching, it's like, oh, I could never fit in all the material I had into a weekend. And I thought, oh, I do need to expand some stuff. And it's like, oh, I do know more than I thought I did. And that's when the academy came. So the academy was channeled to me to have this as a school to start teaching these extended, expanded classes. And the first one was a year of healing in 2019. So we did a full year, once a weekend, going through a lot of the modalities that I'd been taught and doing a lot of processing and healing and clearing and all that good stuff that you can only do when you're in an expanded program. So I started that so I did the full year 2019 and 2020 we started, but COVID-19 came and we had lockdowns. So I stopped and we had to cancel the rest of that year. And that was the stage where I had to decide, how am I going to keep doing this work if we're in lockdown or if this pandemic stays or whatever. And I'd always resisted doing online work because I thought, no, you have to do it in person and you only get the impact in person. So a few months in lockdown and it kind of shifted my mind. Sometimes it takes me a little while to get there, but I get there. And it's like, oh, I could do this online. So I did kind of an experimental weekend trying to see how it worked, and it went really, really well. And I was really happy. So I said, okay, let's do this. So I've started this year an enhanced year of healing. So it's an expanded version of the expanded version at this stage, which I've broken down into modules. And that has started, it's going, I'm doing some other events. So it's how I work is stuff is continually changing because I'm listening to guidance. Be it somebody say something to me and it's like, oh, I need to think about that. Or I'll kind of get specific. This is what you need to do for this class. And I'm often waiting to see what information I get. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is what I have to do. So that's kind of how I get my information.
Would you say it's more the academy is more for people who want to become practitioners and teach themselves, or really just the average person can come?
Yeah, both.
Okay.
Yeah, because that I've addressed that with students who will contact me and say, I really want to do your class. I have no idea why. I have no idea what you're actually doing or what it's about. And what has happened is many of us have had a trigger in our DNA, which when we see something, the trigger will go off. And it's like, I have to do that, but I don't know why I have to do that. And that's how I got into a lot of them. And
more people need to listen to that.
Need to listen to it and trust it.
Yeah, because I think there's a lot of people, maybe things have changed a little bit. I always look for the silver lining in things. And I think that there is a lot of silver lining in COVID.
Absolutely.
Being able to do things virtually like this, now you can reach people worldwide, whereas
Yeah,
before it
exactly.
was limited to who was really going to come to Connecticut,
Yeah.
that often. But I'm hoping that another silver lining is that more people start to listen to their inner wisdom. I keep saying, like, why aren't people listening to their intuition about, this or that or whatever?
Right.
Like, if you just stop for even 5 minutes and just
Yeah.
like sit there,
Yeah.
and you don't have to meditate for hours or whatever. I mean, sure, that's it's better because you'll get more messages. But even if you just stop for a few minutes, and maybe it's more like a feeling. Like for me, it's more about getting. I'm a big thinker,
Yeah.
but I've also learned to tune into the way my body feels.
Yes.
So it's when I get a feeling, for me, it's like, in the gut area, like,
Yeah.
Rib cage, stomach area, that, oh, wait, like I need to stop and listen to that. And there's so many people that just don't, you know,
Right.
they chalk it up to, oh, I ate something bad for lunch.
Yeah. And the other piece is that what I have to figure out is that I don't get information the way that we typically associate people who do this work get their information. So I would judge myself, particularly at the beginning when I wasn't having the visions that other people were having and thinking I was doing it wrong. But over the years, it's like, no, I get the same information. It either grows or I get it in a different way. And I've had to learn to trust my way. And I'm very adamant in teaching, when I teach classes, that your way of getting information is different than anyone else's. And so part of the process of doing this work is finding out not only why you're here, but how you find out why you're here.
Yep.
So yeah, that was a big one.
Yeah, exactly. So that's great. So anyone can come to these.
Anyone.
It doesn't
Oh
have to
yeah,
be.
so I forgot that's what
Right.
we were talking
I
about.
know we went on a little tangent there.
I did that a lot. Yeah, so anyone can come. They may not understand it, but I've had a few people who've done no spiritual work before in corporate America doing these big programs. And some of them go on to do healing work, and some of them just use the energy to be a being of light in corporate America. And we
That's
need
awesome.
that too.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's fantastic. I was going to ask you, have you had people come that have never experienced anything like that before? Because I'm just imagining, people are going to be listening to this, and some people may have heard about things, but they really have never had any experience
Right.
with energy or healing or anything like that. So it sounds like what you're saying to me, though, is the right people will show up. It's
Yeah.
almost like something will pull you if you're meant to do
Yeah.
this. If you listen just a little bit to that, or that feeling, then that's how people gravitate to you.
Absolutely. And it's nice if they have some background with some meditation or have listened to Deepak Chopra and have some kind of information. If they have some awareness of their emotions and what they're feeling, but it's not necessary. It's an added bonus.
Right.
And how I work is we do a lot of sharing in any of the classes that I teach, because I believe that no matter what you're learning, you are also healing at the same time. So a lot of stuff is coming up for healing, and sharing is going to help ground the energy that you've been working with. And it's also going to bring some cognitive awareness of what's going on for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It also helps you to take you out of, if you've just done a meditation, it's like getting you back into your body. So the classes I do go very deep, and there's a lot of very deep healing that happens. And that's just how I work. Not everybody works at that depth.
Mm-hmm.
And even if I wanted to, I couldn't not.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, what do you have right now that people can get involved in? I know you mentioned a year program. Is that something where people need to start at a certain time, or it's kind of rolling?
Yeah, what I did this year was I divided it up into modules. So module 1 started in January, goes to July. July starts the second module. So most of the people have signed up for the whole programs, but there are kind of a few spaces for module 2 and module 3, which starts in January 20. Can you believe I'm talking about 2022? It's crazy.
Yeah, I know. Although February is almost over, so it's not
I
that
know.
crazy.
Yeah, right. So there are some spots in module 2. Module 2 is focused on rebirthing. Module 3 is focused on Akashic Field healing. But I also, because I realized they were nearly full, I set up some other classes. So I've set up a weekend for rebirthing. No, that one's not a weekend. What I did was I changed it around. That's going to be 8 evenings. So it starts in March. It'll be 2 evenings a month. So run for 4 months. So it's the same time as a weekend, but it's at a different time. So that's rebirthing.
Okay, and so you don't like someone could take module 2 without taking module 1.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then I have an intensive Akashic Field healing, because that's kind of what's in vogue at the moment. And that is starting in June, and that's going to run for 20 weeks. Weekly.
So that's fascinating. Just explain to us briefly what are Akashic records?
So our Akashic records. So basically, the Akasha is where all information is stored. So all our personal information, the planet's information, the trees, everything is stored in the Akashic records. And in the past, people would refer to it like as Akash or the ethers or the library of records. So lots of kind of little names that it was called. Edgar Cayce was the most famous person who worked with the Akashic records. So if you've heard of him, otherwise just Google him. There's lots of stuff out there. Mm-hmm. And then in the last 20 years, scientifically, they are proving through quantum physics, quantum mechanics, that there really is an A field, is what it is called, a 0 point field where all information is stored. So with quantum physics, we're discovering, yes, this stuff is real. This stuff that we believed as old wives' tales or whatever, it's like, it's real. So most people that do Akashic Field work are actually just reading the records. I shouldn't say just reading, they're reading the records, and a lot of people get readings from the records. So finding out what's going on, what's future potential, all that kind of stuff. What I trained in was called Akashic Field healing. And that's looking to see the trauma that's in your records that is limiting your access to your future potential. So all your records are your past information, present information, and future potential. So when you've got a trauma in your field, it's limiting your access to your future potential. And then there's also something called a block. So if you have a block in your field as a result of a trauma, it's actually completely blocking. You cannot even see what your future potential is. And in that category, there's lots of vows and contracts and stuff like that that's in there. So what the training I do is to kind of go back to the history of the Akasha, where it came from, a little bit of the quantum physics theory of the interesting scientific stuff in as simple a way as possible. Different ways of connecting with the Akasha. And then we use charts to do this system. So I spent a lot of time going through all the charts and teaching people how to use the charts, and then roll it all up into how to do a session. That's why it's 20 weeks.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think that information is amazing. I mean, so I went through a life coaching certification program.
Okay.
And we talked about conscious limiting beliefs that people had. You just have to be aware of the negative things that you say to yourself that block you from doing whatever, whether it's finding your purpose or being successful in a career or in a relationship or whatever it might be. So that what you're talking about is really fascinating to me, because I feel like what you're saying is more on a subconscious or universal mind level, where the block is.
Yeah.
It's almost like we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and it's like whenever you do healing, it's like you're doing your personal healing. You're also doing healing on behalf of your culture, on behalf of your sex. Um, you're impacting the planet. So if you work on your shoulder, you're healing whatever the equivalent part of the planet is, the shoulder. So it's like what we are conscious and aware of is just the teeniest tip of the iceberg of what is really happening.
Right, because it's group consciousness.
Yeah,
So,
and
right.
conscious is such a small portion of the brain.
And we know this is true though, because when we look at studies that have been done on either group meditation, like Joe Dispenza's huge for that, you know, like
Hmm.
you look at his huge group meditations or even other like worldwide things, they can actually measure the
Yeah,
energy
yeah,
or, you know, things that change on different scales that show, oh, you know, the combined consciousness, I think it's like a Schumann resonance or something like
right.
that.
Yeah,
There's some scale that they can actually measure that will show how cohesive the thought pattern is around the world or
yeah,
within your group.
yeah,
And you can actually see these scales go up and go down based
yeah,
on how people are thinking
yeah.
likewise in a positive state.
And even if you've come across David Hawkins, the David Hawkins scale,
Mm-hmm.
so he has measured levels of consciousness from 0 to 100. So I think it's 400 or 500 was when you're starting to kind of be more connected and more positive, shall we say. It's not, we're not up at love at that stage, but we're more positive. Whereas when he wrote that book, human consciousness was at 200.
Wow.
So as the group consciousness shifts, so each one of us contributes to the group consciousness. As it shifts, that David Hawkins scale goes up. So we're kind of up above 400 or 500. And I think 600 is love from what I remember. I can't remember exactly, but that's what we're working towards. We're
That's
not there
amazing.
yet. Yeah.
Yeah.
But we're
Well,
working
it's a
towards it.
journey. It's a journey,
Yeah,
right? Like, you know,
absolutely.
I guess if we get to the end, then what do we do?
Well, that's a whole other interesting concept of divine expansion. There's a project I'm working with called the Divine Expansion Project, which, if we continue with our growth, we are feeding into the growth of the divine. So the divine itself never stops growing. So we're contributing to that. So in that way, there's never an end. Now, how it will be expressed,
Right.
hopefully, will be easier.
Yeah, well, you just set me up for another podcast with you.
Oh, there you go.
Absolutely. Well, Ailish, this has been awesome. I mean, I could talk to you all day. I love this stuff. I think
Me
it's
too.
super fascinating. I think it's amazing for, you know, for people to learn more about this and further their healing and all of that. So how can people find out more about you and the programs that you have, you know, going on right now, how
Yeah,
they can get involved?
I have two websites, so I kind of broke it down. And one website is more the healing services I offer, and that's soulhealingjourney.com, SOUL.
Mhm.
And then my other one, I put all the classes and trainings on the other one, which is Academy for Soul Healing. So they're the two main websites. You can contact me. I'm going to have to spell this. Eilis at soulhealingjourney.com, which is and I have to say it slowly because people's brains can't compute.
Right.
EILIS, which doesn't spell like Eilish at all, but Eilish at soulhealingjourney.com. Or you can call me 203-767-5954. Or you can ask Diane. I can't remember how to get in touch with
Right.
you. Call me.
Hey, they can always reach out to us at Natural Nutmeg for
There we
sure
go. Yeah.
and find you in our magazine. You have another great
Yeah.
article in the March-April issue that is coming out in a couple weeks.
And I have some ads for some of the events that I've got coming up.
Yep. Yep.
I think,
Great.
yeah, and I put stuff in the directory, I think, from what I remember.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Mm-hmm.
I,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
Fantastic information. And of course, this podcast lives on our website at naturalnutmeg.com, and it'll be e-blasted out to all of our readers and listeners. And we want to thank everybody for being with us today. And Eilis, hope you have a great day, and hope everybody else has a wonderful day too.